Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening from wherever you're watching or listening. My name is Caleb Glick. I'm a lawyer here in the great state of Texas with the Calhoun School of Law to bring you a lot of information plenty of bad folks would rather you not have. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we'll provide another installation to our Anti-Federalist Papers series going on number 54. So if you haven't gone back and watched 1 through 53, I would highly encourage you to do so because understanding the Anti-Federalist Papers in addition to the Federalist Papers will provide you a very well-rounded advantageous understanding of the U.S. Constitution, and understanding the U.S. Constitution will be absolutely necessary if you intend to combat any sort of lawfare waged against you, your loved ones, or your hard-earned property. So let's go ahead and jump on over to the Anti-Federalist Papers. Like I said, we're going on to number 54. Now, there are multiple institutions from which you can get a paper and digital copy of the Anti-Federalist Papers. Go ahead and get both just in case you can't access one or the other for whatever infinite number of reasons. And while you're out there looking, go ahead and get a copy of the Federalist Papers so you can join us in comparing and contrasting the arguments for and against ratifying the U.S. Constitution. Excellent. So number 54 is titled Apportionment and Slavery, Northern and Southern Views. This four-part essay shows both Northern and Southern dissatisfaction with the Great Compromise. The first is taken from the third essay of Brutus, the second from the speeches of Rollins Lowndes, Rollins Lowndes, that's not a hard name to pronounce, to the South Carolina Ratifying Convention on January 16th, 17th, and 18th of 1788, the third from the sixth essay by Cato, the fourth from an essay by a Georgian, appearing in the Gazette of the State of Georgia on November 15th, 1787. Quote, representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states, which may be included in this union, according to their respective numbers, which shall be determined by adding to the whole number of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years, and excluding Indians not taxed, 3/5 of all other persons. What a strange and unnecessary accumulation of words are here used to conceal from the public eye what might have been expressed in the following concise manner. Representatives are to be proportioned among the states respectively according to the number of freemen and slaves inhabiting them, counting 5 slaves for 3 free men. Quote, in a free state, says the celebrated Montesquieu, we'll definitely be going over his works in future lectures, quote, every man who is supposed to be a free agent ought to be concerned in his own government, therefore the legislature should reside in the whole body of the people, or their representatives. But it has never been alleged that those who are not free agents can, upon any rational principle, have anything to do in government, either by themselves or others. If they have no share in government, why is the number of members in the assembly to be increased on their account? Is it because in some of the states a considerable part of the property of the inhabitants consists in a number of their fellow men, who are held in bondage in defiance of every idea of benevolence, justice, and religion, and contrary to all the principles of liberty which have been publicly avowed in the late glorious revolution? If this be a just ground for representation, the horses in some of the states, and the oxen in others, ought to be represented, for a great share of property in some of them consists in these animals, and they have as much control over their own actions as these poor unhappy creatures who are intended to be described in the above recited clause by the words all other persons. By this mode of apportionment, the representatives of the different parts of the Union will be extremely unequal. In some of the southern states, the slaves are nearly equal in number to the freemen, and for all these slaves, they will be entitled to a proportionate share in the legislature. This will give them an unreasonable weight in the government, which can derive no additional strength, protection, nor defense from the slaves, but the contrary. Why, then, should they be represented? What adds to the evil is that these states are to be permitted to continue the inhuman traffic of importing slaves until the year 1808, and for every cargo of these unhappy people which unfeeling, unprincipled, barbarous, and avaricious wretches may tear from their country, friends, and tender connections, and bring into those states, they are to be rewarded by having an increase of members in the General Assembly. Signed, Brutus. So now we're on to the second snippet. 6 of the eastern states formed a majority in the House of Representatives. In the enumeration, he passed Rhode Island and included Pennsylvania. Now, was it consonant with reason, with wisdom, with policy to suppose in a legislature where a majority of persons sat whose interests were greatly different from ours, that we had the smallest chance of receiving adequate advantages? Certainly not. He believed the gentleman that went from this state to represent us in convention possessed as much integrity and stood as high in point of character as any gentleman that could have been selected. And he also believed that they had done everything in their power to procure for us a proportionate share in this new government. But the very little they had gained proved what we may expect in future, that the interest of the northern states would so predominate as to divest us of any pretensions to the title of a republic. In the first place, what cause was there for jealousy of our importing Negroes? Why confine us to 20 years, or rather, why limit us at all? For his part, he thought this trade could be justified on the principles of religion, humanity, and justice, for certainly to translate a set of human beings from a bad country to a better was fulfilling every part of these principles. But they don't like our slaves, because they have none themselves, and therefore want to exclude us from this great advantage. Why should the southern states allow of this without the consent of 9 states? We had a law prohibiting the importation of Negroes for 3 years, a law he greatly approved of. But there was no reason offered when the southern states might not find it necessary to alter their conduct and open their ports. Without Negroes, this state would degenerate into one of the most contemptible in the Union, and he cited an expression that fell from General Pinckney on a former debate, that whilst there remained 1 acre of swampland in South Carolina, he should raise his voice against restricting the importation of Negroes. Even in granting the importation for 20 years, care had been taken to make us pay for this indulgence, each Negro being liable, on importation, to pay a duty not exceeding $10, and in addition to this, they were liable to a capitation tax. Negroes were our wealth, our only natural resource. Yet, behold how our kind friends in the North were determined soon to tie up our hands and draw us of what we had. The Eastern states drew their means of subsistence in a great measure from their shipping, and, on that head, they had been particularly careful not to allow of any burdens. They were not to pay tonnage or duties. No, not even the form of clearing out. All ports were free and open to them. Why, then, call this a reciprocal bargain, which took all from one party to bestow it on the other? Major Pierce Butler observed that they were to pay 5 per cent impost. This, Mr. Lowndes proved, must fall upon the consumer. They are to be the carriers, and we being the consumers, therefore all expenses would fall upon us. A great number of gentlemen were captivated with this new constitution, because those who were in debt would be compelled to pay. Others pleased themselves with the reflection that no more confiscation laws would be passed. But those were small advantages, in proportion to the evils that might be apprehended from the laws that might be passed by Congress whenever there was a majority of representatives from the Eastern states who were governed by prejudices and ideas extremely different from ours. Great stress was laid on the admirable checks which guarded us, under the new Constitution, from the encroachments of tyranny. But too many checks in a political machine must produce the same mischief as in a mechanical one, that of throwing all into confusion. But supposing we considered ourselves so much aggrieved as to reduce us to the necessity of insisting on redress, what probability had we of relief? Very little indeed. In the revolving on misfortune, some little gleams of comfort resulted from a hope of being able to resort to an impartial tribunal for redress. But pray what reason was there for expectancy that, in Congress, the interest of 5 southern states would be considered in a preferable point of view to the 9 eastern ones? The mode of legislation in the infancy of free communities was by the collective body, and this consisted of free persons, or those whose age admitted them to the right of mankind and citizenship, whose sex made them capable of protecting the state, and whose birth may be denominated freeborn. Denominated freeborn. And no traces can be found that ever women, children, and slaves, or those who were not sui juris, in the early days of legislation, met with the free members of the community to deliberate on public measures. Hence is derived this maxim in free governments that representation ought to bear a proportion to the number of free inhabitants in a community. This principle your own state constitution and others have observed in the establishment of a future census, in order to apportion the representatives and to increase or diminish the representation to the ratio of the increase or diminution of electors. But what aid can the community derive from the assistance women, infants, and slaves in their deliberation or in their defense? What motives, therefore, could the convention have in departing from just and rational principle of representation, which is the governing prince of this state and of all America? Signed, Cato. Now we're on to the third snippet. Article 1, Section 26. 26? What in the world? 2. Article 1, Section 2. I don't know how 26 came out. Article 1, Section 2. This section mentions that, within 3 years after the first meeting of the Congress of the United States, an enumeration shall take place, the number of representatives not to exceed 1 member for every 30,000. This article I believe to be inadmissible. First, it affords to small a representation, supposing 48 at the highest calculation, and especially in the southern states, their climate, soil, and produce, not being capable of that population as in the northern states. Would it not therefore be better to increase the number of representatives, say 1 member for every 20,000 for the states north of Virginia and 1 for every 15,000 south of the said state, itself included? Or, secondly, divide the states into districts which shall choose the representatives by which every part of a state will have an equal chance without being liable to parties or factions. Should it be said it will increase the expense, it will be money well laid out, and the more so if we retain the paying them out of our own bands. And supposing the voting in the House of Representatives was continued as heretofore by states, would it not be more equal still? At any rate, I would strenuously recommend to vote by states and not individually, as it will be accommodating the idea of equality which should ever be observed in a republican form of government. Or, thirdly, if it was in proportion to the quotas of the states as rated in taxation, then the number of members would increase with the proportion of tax, and at that rate there would always be an equality in the quota of tax as well as representation. For what chance of equality according to the Constitution in question can a state have that has only 1 or 2 votes when others have 8 or 10? For it is evident that each representative, as well as senator, is meant to have a vote, as it mentions no other mode but in choosing the president. And as it is generally allowed that the United States are divided into 2 natural divisions, the northern as far as Virginia, the latter included forms the southern. This produces a wide difference in climate, soil, customs, manners of living, and the produce of the land, as well as trade, also in population, to which it is well observed the latter is not so favorable as the former, and never can, nor will be, nature itself being the great obstacle. And when taxation is in agitation, as also many other points, it must produce differences in sentiments, and in such dispute, how is it likely to be decided? According to the mode of voting, the number of members north of Virginia, the first 3 years is 42, and the southern, Virginia included, 23. Is human nature above self-interest? If the northern states do not hoard the southern in taxation, it would appear then really that they are more disinterested men than we know of. I believe that is all for number 54. So if you have any questions about what was said, that was quite a bit of information. What was said in number 54, maybe questions about what was said in the preceding papers, or if there's a topic you'd like me to cover in a future lecture, go ahead and post those down in the comments below, because the entire purpose of the Calhoun School of Law is to provide you with the necessary skills and information to combat any sort of lawfare that will be waged against you, your loved ones, or your hard-earned property. So please, if you have any questions at all, go ahead and post them down in the comments. Excellent. So my name is Caleb Glick. I'm a lawyer here in the great state of Texas with the Calhoun School of Law to bring you a lot of information that plenty of bad folks would rather you not have. I hope you enjoyed this lecture, and if not, while you're down in the comments, go ahead and let me know how I can do better so I can best serve that purpose of helping you. I hope you'll have a wonderful day, and I'm not sure what the topic for the next lecture is going to be, but I'll do my best to make it as informative and entertaining as this one, if not more so. Regardless of the topic of the next lecture, until I see y'all then, I bid you all farewell.